All right, welcome to Building Static Sites with Hugo and Github. Today we're going to start with some slides, then we're going to switch to a demo, and switch back to one last slide. I'm going to be watching the chat box for questions and comments throughout the talk, and there'll be time at the end too for questions. Keep in mind there's about a 10-second delay between hitting enter in the chat box and me seeing it on my screen. So let's get started. So our agenda today, we're going to first talk about what are static sites, then we're going to talk about how to make them using Hugo, and then how to host them using GitHub. So before talking about static sites, though, let's first talk about normal sites for some context. So this is a high-level 5-step workflow for what a normal or dynamic site looks like. So in step 1, we have the user requesting a URL. In step 2, the DNS service maps the URL to an IP address. And in step 4, in the dotted line box, this is the part we're interested in, where the web server processes the request, builds the output, and then step 5 sends it back to the user. So in step 4a, that kind of processing can be arbitrary. It could be anything. It could be an external call, a database lookup. It could forward it to a second web server. So the thing to note here is that that in step 5, every response to the user is essentially custom. So now that we have this in mind, let's look at what the workflow looks like for a static site. Everything is the same except for the box in step 4. So all the web server is doing in step 4 is it's looking up a file and then passing it to the user. So here we can see that every response is identical or static. All the web server is doing is hosting files, finding it, and then serving that file to the user. So we can see here that this looks pretty much like what GitHub does, and this is how we'll be able to use GitHub to host our website later on. So this seems like it's a pretty big restriction on what your website can do. So how can you decide if static sites are a good fit for your use case? So next we're going to take a look at some pros and cons of static sites. So dynamic sites can support arbitrary complexity. You can have any kind of logic you want, and they're the standard configuration. So they have the most support. There's also service providers like Squarespace, where if you don't want to set up your site yourself, there's a nice UI that you can use. Click through everything. So that also leads into the cons, where because it's more complex, there's more ways that your site can fail. You're also responsible for keeping all the software that your site uses up to date, or if you pay for a service provider like Squarespace, they'll keep it up to date for you. So good use cases for dynamic sites are when you have some kind of interaction. So that could be direct client-server interaction, like in Google Maps, where you're zooming and panning over the map, and depending on what you're viewing, Google's sending you that part of the map. Or it could be indirect client-to-client interaction, where there's some kind of social exchange going on. So I think in these social interaction cases, usually it's when you have users and there's profiles, and you have users talking to each other. So on the static side, we can see that it's a simpler setup. We can get cheaper or free hosting on GitHub, which we'll see soon. I think the primary drawback is that the tooling is not mature. So the libraries used to create static sites are still being worked on and updated. That's one drawback. Also that it requires some technical expertise. So there aren't tools like Squarespace for dynamic sites where everything is plug and play. You'll need to be comfortable using Hugo and using the command line and source control to manage your static website. So say you looked at the pros and cons and decided that a static site is what you're interested in. How would you actually do it? So the simplest way would just be to maintain a separate file for each web page, which is what we're looking at in the first box over here. So in this case, each page is its own file. And then we can see right away that there's an issue when we want to make changes for common features. For example, if every page has a banner at the top of the site and we want to change the banner, that means that we're going to need to go through every file in our site and change that file. So that's pretty easy to fix by moving to the second box where we just pull common pieces out and make them modular. So in the case of the header, we can extract the header out into the header.html, and every page now refers to header.html. But we still have some limitations here. For example, if you added a new post to your website, and you had a menu on the left-hand side that links to recent posts, you would still need to manually update that list of recent posts. So I call that cross-referencing. So there's still some manual work involved in creating new content. There's also manual work involved when your content is still coupled with the design. So for example, if you think about wanting to change the theme of your site, say you wanted to get rid of the sidebar and transform it into some different shape. Even in this manually maintained, even though it's a modular approach, that wouldn't be possible. You would need to redesign your site. So it would be nice if we wanted to create a new post, if you could just create a single file, drop it into the post folder. And for themes, if we could just switch themes as much as we wanted. So I guess the next step in the evolution would just be to write some code that lets you do these two things. So the big idea for rolling your own static site generator would be to add a pre-processing step. You have the source code, and then you process the source code, and it gets the display code. So what the source code is holding is it's a full decoupling of content from source. So the source code contains the content all by itself in some simple language, say Markdown. Then it contains the design all by itself. And what the processing step does is it combines the content and the design, and it generates HTML. So static site generators are actually pretty simple, and that's why there's so many different versions of them, and some people like to write their own. And the problem if you write your own is that it won't have all the features that you might want to use, and then if you write your own, then you're also responsible for your own. So I guess the final step in evolution would be to use a pre-made static site generator. So in this talk, we're going to be using Hugo. So briefly, why Hugo out of all the other choices? I like using Hugo because it's pretty fast. You can generate a page in less than 1 millisecond. Some other static site generators are slower, much slower than that, and it's relatively simple. It's written in Go, so you don't need to have Go in your system. You can actually download a pre-compiled binary and then just run based on that. So now let's look at what our final workflow is going to look like with GitHub and Hugo. So what's going on here is we're hosting our site on GitHub using GitHub Pages. So GitHub Pages hosts your site on user.github.io/repo. DNS is the same. DNS is going to be mapping us to the GitHub Pages IP addresses. So let's talk about step 4. So there's some complexity going on in step 4. So in step 4, we see the source, the split between source and code and display code. The source code is going to be living in the master branch, and the display code is going to be living in the GitHub Pages. So where we're going to have a setup where we use GitHub Actions, which is a CI-like workflow tool. And we're going to set up GitHub Actions so that every time you commit to master branch, holding the source code, you want to run Hugo on it, build your code, and then commit that to GitHub Pages. So with this setup, this means that when you make changes, you just commit it to master. then it will automatically make its way into GitHub pages and show itself on your website. So that's it for background material. So let's see this in action. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start by cloning and configuring a starting repo that I configured. We'll take a look at what's inside. And then once we have our site set up, we're going to try a couple things, play around with it. So we're going to create more posts, we're going to switch themes, and then we're going to override a theme or template. Don't see any questions, but if you do have any, you can post them in the chat box. So, okay, demo. Okay, so this is the pre-made repo that I made. So what this repo contains is the workflow that we talked about on the previous slide, where there's two branches, master and GitHub pages, and there's an actions file set up that automates the commit from master to GitHub. So there's some instructions here that we need to go through. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fork this repo. So unfortunately, since it's mine, I can't fork it. I can't. Since this is my repo, I can't fork it, but I can. There's a workaround where I can just import it. Let's call it a demo. Part finish. All right, it's done. Our forked repo, clone it. Come over to PowerShell, clone this repo. Okay, so there's a couple changes that we need to make before we're going to be ready. So we're going to need to create a deploy key. What the deploy key makes possible is the automation. We need some way of verifying that we have permissions to make commits to GitHub pages. So there's steps over here, and we're just going to follow these steps. So first, we're going to need to create a new RSA key. Okay, RSA key is done. I decided to call it master. Next thing we need to do is we're going to secret. Okay, so the secret is in the file called master. So we're going to type that to our clipboard and come over to back to our repo, settings, secret, new secret. Setting. Paste our RSA private key here, and then I'm going to call it actions deploy. Then we create our deploy key. It's a similar setup where we're coming to the deploy key, same thing, and we're going to give it write access to. So, and in this case, we're going to pipe the public key for clipboard. Right. Public key. Our password. paste that in. Okay, so we're set up here. Let's see what else we need to do. Created the keys, update external repository. Okay, so the site has a configuration file that we need to update. So let's go into our site. That's what's in there right now, and the configuration file is called config.toml. I'm going to open that in Sublime Text. Oh, okay, open that Sublime Text, and just kidding, it's the wrong file. We need to update. We need to update the workflow file. So the workflow file is located here. Okay, so this workflow file is what's automating commits to master. So we see the steps here. Checking it out, setting up Hugo, it's calling Hugo, and then it's deploying. So what we need to change here is we need to change external repository, our real repository. We also probably change the username, not me. Okay, so we're done with that. And I just want to commit this. Okay, so we committed it. Let's come over here. So GitHub Actions is that workflow tool that's running. We see the first time it failed because it didn't have the deploy key. So if you went in and looked at logs, that's a good. So now it's working. Great. There's one more thing we need to do, which is to own the theme. Okay, so themes were set up as Git submodules. So you can see that currently our directory looks like this. So this folder was set up as a Git submodule, which means that when we clone it, it's empty. So if we want to develop locally, we need to pull down the files for the theme. So we can do that by running git submodule update. Okay, so our site is fully set up. So what to do next is let's run this locally before we make any changes and commit it to GitHub. So we can see what's going on locally by running Hugo server, and then Hugo server will build our site and what it looks like at localhost. Look. Oh, I stopped it back. Okay, now it's running. So this is what our site looks like using the unknown theme. So it's bare bones. There's no posts, but because Hugo server is running, this means that any changes that we make to our site will automatically be displayed here. So I'm actually going to open a second PowerShell instance so I can keep Hugo server running. Okay, so I have a 7 PowerShell instance, which is keeping Hugo server running, and then here, where we're going to make some changes and then see how it gets reflected on our site in live time. So I created some posts called dummy posts, so I'm just going to paste that in. So we can see that right away, these dummy posts are showing up in our recent posts. So all of this design work is from the theme. So having recent posts be here, and then these buttons be here. So let's commit this to our site. Okay, so actually let's go to here, and right now our site is being served at over here. our site looks like this. Our site looks like this on GitHub, but this is what our site looks like recently. So let's looks like locally. So let's commit our changes and then see it get reflected on GitHub. That is okay. So we added some new posts. So that's going to take a little bit to get updated. So let's just take a look at what a post looks like. So this is what a post looks like. So there's some top level material. In our case, it's just title and date, and then it's just content down here. So these are markdown files. So it supports basic markup like bold and images. Let's go back. I think it should be done. All right. So now our site is our live site has these post updates. What else can we do? So we can switch themes. So say we don't like this theme and we want to try out a different theme. So Hugo has lots of themes. So you can see the list here. There's 100. There's a whole bunch. So let's say we're scrolling down and we see some cool theme that we like. Say this one. Say this one looks really cool. So let's try it out. Go to the themes page, and we're just going to add it. I'm going to get that, and what we're going to do is we're going to say git submodule add. Okay. And we're going to put this in the themes folder, and we're going to call it dimension. From that, and what we need to do is it's still cloning. Let finish. I think it's stuck. Let's try that again. Let's see, did it clone successfully? It looks like it did. So let's try it out. So what we need to do to try it out is we need to the theme in our site's configuration file. So the configuration file is called config.toml. Open that up and change the theme from non-K to dimension. See this reflected immediately, and it is. So now our site has a completely new look, pretty modern, a lot of JavaScript and animation stuff going on. Yeah, so we just completely overhauled our site by switching themes. So the last thing we can take a look at is overriding themes. So say you have your site set up with a theme and you decide that you want to make some changes to it, make some custom changes. And say that the custom change you want to make is you don't want it to say design, you want it to say design by. So how can you override this template to that change? So let's take a look at, go up here, the layout of the theme setup. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to create a layout. We're going to override a file in layouts and partial. So what this means is first we need to create this directory. Then we're going to copy the file that we're going to modify. And once we finish copying it, we'll take a look at it. So let's take a look at this file that we just copied over. HTML. Okay, so what this file in layouts partial is this is the layout placeholder for the footer. So every time that a footer is needed, this is the snippet of code that's being put in. So this should really be called footer.html. So this is the code that's controlling this design the add Nagi HTML5 up. So to override this in the template, what we need to do is we need to make a copy of this file. So we're taking the file out of the theme folder into our website's repository, and then whatever we change here, so any files that your website has overrides what's present in the theme. So this file is now present here, so anything we make here will override the theme. So we can just change this to design by. Layouts. Layouts. Okay, and it's supposed to work. So something is wrong. Let's debug this. Layouts, partials. So I probably have a spelling mistake somewhere related to the file path not being correct, and it's not picking up this file. Layouts as partials as. Pretty weird. I'll figure this out later and then post it. So that's it for the demo. So let's go back to the slide. We have one more slide to look at. So this last slide is just talking about what else we can do with Hugo that wasn't covered in the demo. So you can have content that looks dynamic in one of three ways. So you can make third-party service calls. So if you use a third-party service, the third-party service can do whatever. So this is how e-commerce and this gives you links here that go to themes that have this support built in. You can also run client-side JavaScript, which is one way that you can have search for your site. Hugo itself also provides two functions called getJSON and getCSV. So in this screenshot here is a snippet of the example from the Hugo documentation of how if you include this in your site, then it will hold the 5 most recent gists of this GitHub user. So this is a form of client-side processing. Hugo also has nationalization and localization support. And there's also a new feature that was added pretty recently where you can combine themes. So if you see parts of themes that you like, you can say that I want this page from this theme, but this other part of the site I want to use from it. Yeah, that's it for the presentation. So I'll stick around for a couple more minutes for questions. Otherwise, that ends this talk, and I'm going to try to figure out what that bug was while I wait for questions. Okay, I don't see any questions. I'm going to close the talk. If you're curious about what the issue with the bug was, it was because I had to restart the Hugo server. So it wasn't picking up that we created a new file. So after closing and restarting the Hugo server, the change. Thanks for listening.